Thank you.
Okay.
Hello, I'm just going to take the screen. I'm Jade Nortlet, one of the marketing guys at Payara, and we've got Arian and Andre with us today.
Hello.
So we're going to be talking about the new features in the latest release. And it's just 45 minutes or so, but it might be a little bit shorter or longer depending on questions. Feel free to tweet either directly at Payara or using the hashtags, so we'll be able to answer on social media, or just put them in the chat as well, and we'll make sure we address those at the end of each section or at the end of the webinar. We will put the recording up for everyone to see. I'll email it to everyone that registered, and we'll probably put it on YouTube and on the website as well for everyone else who's just going to make it today. As I said before, we've got Andre and Ari, who's going to be leading the each section. They're both senior engineers and been with Payara for quite some time. You probably, especially seen Andre does a lot of talks all over the world. We're going to be covering new cluster modes for running in the cloud, auto-completion, Payara commands, support for pluggable JCE cryptography providers, new Payara resources, improvements in deployment speed and security components, and I'm sure there's other things they'll be going through as well. So with that, I'm just going to pass it over then to Andre.
Okay. So I'll switch then to my version of the slides. And here we go. So. Okay. So yeah, I think Jane already introduced me, and if you were at the previous webinar, I also talked about new features in 1.8.3. So I'll go with together with Arian through the features in 1.8.4. And first I want to mention that there are slight differences in version 1.8.3 and 1.8.4, mostly because there are new JDK versions which kind of broke the behavior of Grizzly NPM library. So we had to provide different versions of the library for different JDK versions. And in the default configuration for Payara Server 5.1.8.4, we now use version selectors in JVM options. And that means that the server launcher will detect the JDK it uses, and then according to the version of the JDK, it will use different Debian options that apply to the particle JDK. So if you want your configuration to work on any JDK and you upgrade from an older version, you should at least copy these JVM options as they are in the stock domain in the new version in Payara 5.1.8.4. Or you can just copy with the selector that applies to a domain without needing to use the version selectors. There's some slight issues in the IDEs with you that come from using the version selectors in the configuration, and we needed to update the NetBeans plugin to work with these. If you have some issues, the easy workaround is to remove the version selectors and only leave one JVM option that applies to your JDK. And then there are some deprecations, some deprecated classes and changes in classes. So if, I recommend to go to the release notes and read what changed between the last version and the previous version. Then coming to the new features, we added some more cluster nodes, which makes it easy to cluster Payara servers and Payara micro instances in the cluster. One of those modes is Kubernetes cluster mode, which works in Kubernetes, and Kubernetes is widely used in many cloud environments. So this cluster mode enables cluster to retrieve just enough information from the Kubernetes environment, from the Kubernetes API, to discover the other services. While before you had to use the TCP discovery to scan a long range of IPs, and this was just too much sometimes in some cloud environments. So this cluster mode just retrieves the necessary information and scans only the services that you define. Another cluster mode that is useful in cloud environments, especially where you don't have Kubernetes under the hood, is DNS cluster mode. And this is useful in environments where you have where services automatically update the DNS server when they go up. So DNS server has all information about all the services and their IP addresses. And Payara instances can ask the DNS server to get the list of all the IP addresses. This is, I think it's useful in Cloud Foundry, which supports DNS discovery, DNS registration of services. Then another feature that is useful mostly when you administer the servers from command line using the Asadmin command. We added a new Asadmin command to generate autocompletion file for Bash. It works in Linux environments and everywhere where Bash can be used, but it also works in some other shells, for example, ZSH. And with these Asadmin command, the server will generate a file which you can just drop into a local system, and your shell will pick it up and provide some options to autocomplete the Asadmin commands, which makes it easy to write the commands. And then another new feature is extension of the Payara health check service to trigger notifications based on health check defined by MicroProfile REST endpoint. So it's a little bit confusing because there are two health components in Payara server. One is MicroProfile health, which is part of the MicroProfile specification, and it is a REST endpoint. This REST endpoint just gives a HTTP response, giving the information either services up or down, and some more information in the request body. While Payara health check service is more complicated. It gathers a lot of information about the application, about the operating system, about the resources, and it triggers notifications based on many different conditions, and also for multiple levels. So if some value, like for example CPU usage, is above a certain level, it can trigger notification like as a warning, as an error, or just as an info message based on the level of based on which threshold the value goes above. And then notification service gets these notifications and routes it to different endpoints. One of them may be a log file, so you get a message in the log, but it can also send messages to other systems, or send the JMS message, which can be received by any application. and processed further. And with this integration, the Payara health check service now monitors the MicroProfile REST endpoint. And if the service is down, reports down status, it triggers notification. So you get the notification in the log file and also other systems. So, and the application can trigger or modify the health of the or the output of the health REST endpoint. So if the health REST endpoint, or in other words, your application can report if something internal is wrong, and then the health REST point will report the services down, but still responding. The server itself will be responding, but the application is in the wrong state. And then you will get the notifications. It's not bulletproof, so because if the server itself is really down and not in a good state, then it's the only thing you need to restart it or somehow get the information from the MicroProfile health endpoint outside of the system. But as long as the Payara server is responsive and can process the output of the MicroProfile health REST endpoint, then you will get the notifications either in log file or other systems. So I want to show you some of these things. Just start with the release notes, what I told in the presentation. The release notes are a lot more detailed with this release than with the previous one, because we saw some issues related to the different JDK versions, and then related to some plugins which didn't work with the default configuration because of the version selectors not supported by the plugins. Some of the plugins do some hacks, like they read documentation, the configuration from the XML, and then start the server by hooking into the start mechanism. So that's why it doesn't work out of the box. In IntelliJ IDEA, everything works out of the box, for example, because it doesn't do any tricks and just starts via a server as if you would start it from command line. And then there are some changes in some internal classes which still can be used by in certain environments, but we mostly don't recommend them to use. We have a Payara API module, which is better to use. And with the auto-completion to demonstrate is very, very easy. I'll have a running server, and then against the running server, I can run Asadmin command generate batch autocomplete and specify a path to a file that I want to store the auto-completion configuration. So I can specify Payara auto-completion, run it, and then I get the file. Here, and it looks like this. Contains the list of Asadmin commands. Then you just need to drop it into the configuration of your shell, and then just type, for example, list and press stop, and it will autocomplete the command. So you can type list applications with just 2 tabs. There are currently no applications deployed, but you can see that there's also start, and you can see start cluster, start instance, start deployment group. So you can use it like this. It's not so powerful to provide completion for arguments, so you still have to remember the arguments, but it's a first version of these auto-completion, and we hope it will help you. And the last thing is to show you the health. So MicroProfile Health Service will just give you the response. Sorry, I'll just pass to Arjen probably. If something is wrong in my environment, it's my last demo. So I'm done. in the end, I'll hopefully. Sorry. Yeah. So, Arjen, I think you can follow.
All right, thank you. All right, then I'll switch to my demo now. Let's see if I share the screen. Okay. All right, so we'll have been looking at the auto-completion and the new cluster modes. Meaning we're now on to the support for the pluggable JCE cryptography providers. Okay, so what are these things actually? JCE, that stands for Java Cryptography Extensions, and they were originally designed as an external extension of JCA, which was the Java Cryptography Architecture. And the reason for this split was that there was a ban, restrictions on exporting anything having to do with encryption and decryption from the US. Java originates from the US, so they had to do something there. At some point, this was done away with. So the restrictions were relaxed, and it wasn't quite needed anymore to have this split. Technically, there's still JCA, JCE, which can be a bit confusing, but practically they are more or less the same thing right now. There are two packages in the JDK that work highly together. JCA itself is highly pluggable, so everything that it contains from certificates, certificate providers, key stores, what have you, that's basically all pluggable and replaceable. JDKs come with default implementations of them. Many people would probably know it if they know JCA from the algorithms that it contains. So sometimes you need to replace an algorithm, you need to strengthen an existing algorithm. So that's quite often where JCA comes into play. And there's like a number of default implementations in the JDK and a number of external ones that you can plug in. Bouncy Castle is probably the most well-known one, but there are a couple of others as well. What you can do when you plug it in, you can either replace an existing algorithm or an existing provider or factory, what have you, or you can augment it basically. So you can add an algorithm. Based on what you want, you would put your provider, your custom provider, on a lower spot. It means it will be queried first, or on a higher spot, meaning it will only be queried when the first ones are not. Payara uses JCA for a lot of things, TLS, that's transport layer security, SSL, client-cert authentication, that's the one from Servlet, and quite a lot more things to sign messages. It's quite often used for SOAP, where you encrypt and sign the response, and the other way around. If you receive a SOAP message that's encrypted or signed, or both. So despite Payara using it in previous version and Glassfish before that, there were a couple of assumptions being made about some specific types. So the providers that are there, they return types, but they will be casted to the Sun specific ones. That works as long as you run it on the Sun JDK. With the default providers, it doesn't work so much when you plug in something else that returns a different type. So all the assumptions, they've now been removed in Payara 5.1.4, and the code only uses the default types. So the interfaces, the standard types from the JDK, nothing else. And that practically means that external JCA providers, basically Bouncy Castle, but your own ones as well, they can now be used basically without issues. So that's pretty good. I'll show a demo to see how it works. I'll switch to clips. Okay, so there's a sample for this. We added a sample to the Java EE samples project, which is a separate project to which Payara contributes a lot, but it's basically a shared project, and many vendors contributed to it in the past. So what we'll start with, so it's quite a lot of code, so I'll briefly walk you through it. What the code does initially is it generates a pair of keys. That's the key the client is going to use. And it will generate a certificate, which is used by the client to identify itself to the server. Which is what's happening here. And it will store those in a temporary key store. And the key store will be used by the code doing the request to the server. Then one of the next things we're going to do, we're going to request the certificate chain from the server. And this is done so we can trust it. Otherwise we would have to add it to the server before that. So we obtain it and we trust it. So we say, okay, well, we know the server, we're going to trust it, and we're going to store that into our own local trust store. Okay, there's some things more going on which I will not go into, but one important thing for this specific demo is that the self-signed certificate that we generated for the client, it uses the common name LFU, which is basically the name, the most important name the client is identifying itself with. The entire name is the distinguished name, the full distinguished name. So what we're going to do using the JCE plugins is create a custom certificate factory, which I'll have ready here. And basically the only thing what the factory does, it returns a custom certificate. Well, the certificate is quite simple. It's basically just calling the base class, and it replaces a principal, and we use that for principal mapping, as we'll see in a bit. So here we have our custom certificate. So it overrides, a couple of things which are not that important for the demo. The important thing is that it's going to replace this principal. So whenever we encounter this one, the one with the LFU name, we're going to return the X500 principal with the common name of U1. So effectively we're doing principal mapping. The entire thing is going to be installed a bit in a hacky way. It's possible to do this, but not recommended. What we do, we have a servlet mapped to a pattern called Bouncy Servlet. And it basically instantiates a provider, in this case Bouncy Castle, and it adds our own certificate factory to it. So this is the one we're overriding. Providers, that's maybe good to mention, providers are essentially maps. So it's a big hash map kind of thing. this method here put is actually from the map type, and we insert services into it. They have a type and they have an algorithm. So in this case, the type is certificate factory. It's the one we're going to override. And X509 is the algorithm. And the standard says that you can combine those two into a single key, which you use to register the service by concatenating them using a dot. All right, we're then using the Java SE global security class to insert the provider. And in this case, we're going to insert it at position 1, meaning it will be the most significant one. Counter to some other collections, this one starts as 1. This can be a bit confusing at first, but it is what it is. As said, normally this would not be recommended. You would basically replace a provider within a running system, so other processes could still be using the other provider. They all shift one up, so if code is still running, it would essentially see one provider in the beginning of an operation, and then maybe in the next one a bit further on. So this is not recommended, it's just for the demo. And our secure servlet, which we have, this is the one we're going to test with. There's very little, it just says, okay, we're authenticated or not. Okay, so let's start up Payara first. Hope the demo gods are over with us. Okay, so there we go, a running server. Now we're going to run this test, which basically means running Maven clean install on it, specifying the server we're going to deploy it to, and the domain. So let's run this thing here. Then a couple of things are happening. Fingers crossed. Okay, so what we see here is that it was adding the certificate that we generated, the client one, to the server, and then it was restarting the domain. This is a thing that is necessary in Payara. If you add the certificate to it, you need to restart the server afterwards. Hopefully in one of the next Payara versions, we will make it possible to add this on the fly without having to restart the server. But for now, you have to do this. And what you see here is that it did the request, it started the test, and the test was a success. And what we specifically saw is that the principle that was being used and found eventually is CU1, which was the one used or printed here. So when this entire thing ran, and we presented it with the custom certificate, the self-assigned one, which had the LFU name in it. It was mapped by our custom JCE provider to do the principal mapping, which eventually resulted in the CNSU1 being returned. So this is one example of using JCE. It's a bit of a contrived example in the way that you'd not normally use JCE for this so much. There are like other systems within Payara to do mapping, role mapping, group mapping. But it did demonstrate that everything worked. So our custom provider, which is mainly Bouncy Castle here, that was the base one, with our custom service, they both worked. So that they've been accepted by Payara and nothing crashed. And in the older versions, at some point, it would assume the type to be run, some of the types that are returned internally to be the run types, and then the exact same demo would crash. There would be a class cast exception somewhere. All right, that concludes our demo. So let's get back to the presentation. And the next one I'd like to talk about is the payara-resources.xml deployment descriptor that we added. So first, some introduction to what this actually is and what this is about. Java EE defines a number of things, and they're called resources. And they can include things like data sources, mail sessions, JMS queues, JMS topics, together called destinations, managed executed services, and some more things. And those things are injected mostly via the @resource annotation. They can be mapped to CDI injections as well, but they're primarily injected by @resource. Or they can be obtained from JNDI. @resource is quite often a shortcut for JNDI lookups. Okay. The resources are normally configured or defined in a couple of ways. So there's the admin console, there's Asadmin, the CLI. They can be added directly to the main.xml as well. Admin console and Asadmin is basically an application to write into the main XML. The main XML is the source of truth, so to say. Some other way is, since developers don't always have access to a running server, is using product-specific descriptor files. An example is classvis-resources.xml. And you can embed this one into the archive. It goes into the meta-in folder of a var, for example. And you will have all your resources configured for you, if possible. The thing is that not all resources are included there, but most of them are. And the third way to do this is using the Java EE standard annotations, or XML in deployment descriptors. And one example would be the data source definition annotation. But there's more. There's the mail session definition. There's one for queues. There's XML variants, which you can use in web XML, application.xml, what have you. So as I mentioned, they can be added to Java EE, and they are in Java EE, but it can take a long time for new things to be added there, since you have to wait for the entire spec release cycle to finish. There's a lot of discussion going on. So it's a slow process still. Even with Jakarta EE, it's probably not going to be fast. So as Payara, when you do want to add resources to those files, you could add them to class-based resources, but that's confusing as well, since that file is assumed to be compatible with class-based, so the same archive could be deployed to class-based as well. But if you add specific things to that, they won't be compatible anymore. So for that reason, we added a new deployment file. It's payara-resources.xml. And this file at the moment is just an alias. So it doesn't have new things in it yet, but we will add them, mostly for the Java EE concurrency utils. They have not been added to class-based resources in the past, so you can't quite add them via a var file, and that can be a problem. So in some circumstances, you don't want a var file to mark with the server resources. In some cases, you want, and it's basically up to the application, to the development team to decide which one works for them. And they don't have an option right now. You have to add them via the admin console or the CLI. So this is something we're going to look into, and class-based resources is the first step toward that, to change that into Payara resources. And then we can add the additional things to that. Okay, furthermore, we have some deployment improvements in 1.8.4. And again, some background is that in Java EE applications, there's a lot of ease of use being added. But that also means the counter side of the coin there is that there's a lot of scanning going on for conditions, basically. A lot of things have to be set up, services have to be initialized, CDI extensions have to be called. So this all takes quite some time. And especially for larger applications, this can be time costly. So it might take 1 minute to deploy, it might take 2 minutes. If it's way beyond that, 5, 6, 7 minutes, people can start to complain, of course. So we have been working for some time to improve those things. So for example, in an earlier version of Payara, Payara sponsored a pre-parsed XML config file for JSF. JSF has these internal XML files that it uses to configure Payara. They take some time to parse, so it uses a pre-parsed version now that's generated during the build of Payara to speed things up a little. And there's an optional parallel in it, meaning that some subsystems can be initialized in parallel. It uses the default executor service for that, if available. Otherwise, it will create a new one on the fly. It's not enabled by default, since it uses some threads. Not everybody likes a server to use a lot of threads when it starts up, but it's an option for people to use. So in Payara 5.184, there have been some more of those things being done. So one of the things is redundant scanning. So there's a lot of scanning, as mentioned, that needs to be done, especially in an ER file that consists of different bar files. And it should be archives. It can be tricky to avoid scanning the same things multiple times. So if you scan something multiple times when you don't have to, obviously it takes more time. You don't have to spend that time, but it can be difficult to track what you've scanned and what you haven't scanned already. We added parallel loading of CDI classes or CDI beans. Again, it's an option since it uses additional threads. And it depends on your server, how many CPUs you have, how many cores, whether it helps. It can definitely help. And one other thing that we did, in the original GlassFish code base, a lot of services were active and they all used threads. And a lot of them, they use their own thread pools. They create threads on the fly sometimes, or they just have some random thread that they keep in static variable. So what we did increasingly, we moved them all to a single platform-wide service, an executor service, which we call the Payara executor service. And eventually this will mean that all those different threads for file monitoring, for log monitoring, for incoming connections, what have you, they will all be manageable by this single executor service, which means you can increase the threads for them, decrease them, set various options, and that would make the entire system much more easier to manage and help with deployment as well, since that those things are being created during deployment. If you reuse threads that are already there in the pool, it can speed things up quite a bit. And the last thing is kind of related to this. We reduced the thread usage for Payara Micro. Specifically, my microservices, they quite often run resource-constrained systems. You don't want to have too many threads there, so we reduced those. On the other hand, if you do use more threads, if you have more capable hardware, you can increase them again, which might or may not, it depends, speed up things. Okay, one example of the improvement, the actual numbers, is that yet one customer who reported the deployment times with Payara 5.184 improved by approximately 40%. And its deployment went from 124 seconds to 70. So that's quite a big difference, really. Okay, then like is usual in a release, we fixed quite a number of bugs. So all these bugs together, they make for quite more stable system. Individual bugs might sometimes be a bit puzzling to people. So if you have encountered that specific bug, you might wonder what the bug is about. So I just picked out one specific example. It's about the OpenID identity store, the ambiguous dependencies for that one. So what that means is that we had multiple stores active in the system. It's basically how CDI beans work. There can be multiple ones available of the same type. And you don't really notice that, since if you don't inject a specific type, they're just there. You can inject multiple ones at the same time, then iterate through them, and everything is fine. So you don't quite see that this happens. And these things, they should normally follow from the definition annotations. So in this case, the OpenID authentication definition. And the thing is that this annotation itself, it doesn't quite do anything. It has to be explicitly scanned for by corresponding CDI extensions. They actually do something, and based on that annotation, they should add stores and mechanisms, what have you, dynamically to the CDI runtime. So in this case, this didn't happen. The stores were added statically, and they should have been added dynamically. So only when this definition annotation is present. So this is just one example. It's not like a headline feature. It's just example of how these bugs work. All right, so I think we're at the end of the presentation. So that's my part, really. So I think we'll go back.
I fixed my demo, so I can show what I did.
Okay, so you can show your demo.
But only if there are no questions. I don't know. Jaden, do we have some questions?
No. There was just one comment about zooming in on one of our instincts, but hopefully when we provide the recording, they'll be able to see the bit they wanted a bit more clear anyway. They can zoom in themselves. But no questions to the content at the minute. But please feel free to ask.
Okay, so I did see a question coming in here. Don't know if this is the right place to ask, but when do you plan to use Jakarta EE instead of Java EE? Okay, so yeah, that's a really good question, which I can answer indeed. So at the moment, we're quite busy with Jakarta EE as well. And the first thing that we're doing is releasing GlassFish 5.1. GlassFish 5.1 is essentially a rebranding of GlassFish 5.01 actually, with all the dependencies being replaced by quite equivalent Jakarta EE dependencies. Functionally wise, they're basically identical, maybe a few changes here and there, but they should be the same. They're only licensed, and the Maven coordinates and thus the archive names have been renamed to the Jakarta versions. Otherwise, it's the same. So yeah, we're going to use these dependencies in Payara quite soon. So that would probably be, and of course you never really know in advance, but the plan is in January. So the GlassFish 5 release is planned for January, which means that all the artifacts have to be final. They have to be published to Maven Central. They're currently in staging in Stana type. So you can use them if you want. You can try them out. For example, Mahara 3.9 has been recently staged. You can already download it. You can already try it out, but it's not a final version. So the TCK hasn't run against it, and it can still change slightly. But the plan is that quite soon After they've gone final, we're going to adopt them in Payara, then apply our patches on top of them, merge those or do PRs for those patches upstream, and then get the entire thing rolling. So that will be the first step. Functionally wise, there wouldn't change much. It would mainly be a license thing. So everything would be Eclipse licensed then. After that, we're going to look at the real new versions. So that would be JCE 3.0, for example, JAX 2.2, JCE Security 1.1 is Citra. That would be a bit further down the line. But as I said, the first step is to adopt the Payara version, the Jakarta versions within Payara. Okay, so I hope that answered the question.
Okay, brilliant. Unless there's anything else, then we'd like to say thank you very much. Please feel free also to message us on Twitter or sign up on the blog. We're putting out content every week that can hopefully be helpful to those interested in Payara and the Java EE industry. So fantastic.
All right.
Thank you.
I guess I'll do the demo in a separate video then.
Oh yeah.
Or in the next, yeah. So I think it's better to demonstrate features in separate videos too. So thank you for joining us. And if you have questions, feel free to ask them still on Payara forum or other channels.
All right, great.
We'll be glad to feedback on the new features.
Okay, yeah, we'll be working hard for the next release.
Brilliant.
Okay, guys, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, cheers.
Okay,
Bye.
bye.